Deana Spehn, and I work on policy for Assembly Speaker Tony Atkins. And I was also the chair of the last committee that the county convened to site a new landfill 20 some odd years ago. So trash is sort of in my blood. Recycling is part of my personal culture, and that hasn't really changed. But one of the things that did happen this last year that's had a significant impact on the state of California is the delegation that went to Paris in December to be part of the United Nations Conference of Parties, that's COP 21. This was the 21st year that nations from around the world got together to talk about what to do about global warming. And this was the most significant year. Something actually tangible happened this time. The realities of climate change and global warming are becoming more and more visible to all of us, and the results of scientific studies, which were broadly discussed in Paris in various venues, gives credence to the concept, the valid concept of we need to do something now. Our delegation was led by Jerry Brown, our governor, and by our former governor, Schwarzenegger, and all the buzz was all around them and what they had done to help make the conference this year a reality. Of course, it was Governor Schwarzenegger who signed Assembly Bill 32, AB 32, that set certain specific goals and requirements for the state that have started us on this path of changing the way that we function as individuals, as corporations, and as governments. Ultimately, 195 nations around the world agreed on what they individually and collectively would do to attempt to keep global warming at gaining no more than 2 more degrees Celsius by in this century, with the hope that we can hold it at 1.5 degrees Celsius. The work began last spring in April or May when Jerry Brown and at the national level, John Kerry, representing the president, started collecting letters from nations and sub-regions around the world with written, signed pledges on what their nation and or sub-region would do as part of COP 21. I think it was 88 commitments from people that they had met with who signed letters. That became part of the document. There were 20,000 people who were credentialed by the United Nations to participate in the conference, 20,000. There was an additional 20,000 in representatives of nonprofits, of local governments, of interested people who just wanted to be there and see the exhibits. The second venue that was of significance was one that was put together by major corporations and small businesses from around the world as companies that have already been practicing better use of renewables in their manufacturing, on how they've changed designs to be more earth-friendly. And that venue was really set up so that other businesses from around the world could come and see what was already being done and understand you can be profitable, you can be successful, and you can produce products that the public wants and needs and still be green. And then the third one, the third venue was really for the public to come and learn more about global warming and climate change and what they can do as individuals. So there was this, we sort of experience a little of this when Comic-Con comes to San Diego and downtown becomes totally transformed. Paris was like that. There was an energy that was palpable. So the first day when we arrived, the document that finally is what is the product that came out of COP 21 was 47 pages. And there were 720 points of contention in those 47 pages. 2 days later, there were 37 pages and 1,056 points of contention, and we were going the wrong direction, but negotiations are like that. And ultimately, it ended up being 31 pages long. At the same time that the negotiations were going on, representatives of different governments from around the world were speaking. And for Tony, who was able to actually be in the room when these conversations were happening, some of the most powerful were the people from island nations in the Asian Pacific area who have already lost islands, whose people have already been moved off of their small islands because sea level rise has already overwhelmed their areas. Others spoke about what the scientists have already told them, that the coastal areas where they grow the majority of their food will be underwater in 10 years, 12 years. Well, do you move as a village to someplace else that you don't know where is going to take a village of 1,000 people? Or do you move as individual families? Or do families get broken up? Because there really is no place identified for millions of people living in the coastal areas around the world to move to. Tony spoke at 3 different venues. Her speech was on what the United States military is doing in response to climate change and global warming. And it was a message and information that wasn't readily being discussed in other places around the world, but in San Diego specifically, and in the United States, what the military is doing to prepare is rather interesting. Several years ago, the Joint Chiefs of Staff in DC commissioned studies to see what kind of climate change impacts are we really talking about. And the results of those studies, some have been declassified, led to what is called the Pacific Pivot, which is taking place right here in San Diego. So at this point, 60% of the Marine Corps personnel and equipment has been relocated to San Diego County. The Navy is in the process of doing the same thing with its personnel and its ships. 60% will be repositioned from the East Coast to San Diego and a little bit further north. Why? Well, because when the military looked at what was happening, what would be happening in the Asian Pacific area of the world, and the number of people who likely will be moved from their homelands, and the potential for humanitarian requests by countries for American aid to come in, it was understood that once again America would step forward and assist other nations, large and small. And so we needed to be able to position our fleet and the Marines to be able to respond that way. The other interesting thing that California has done to prepare for climate change and global warming is, and sea level rise specifically, is that Scripps Institute in San Diego was hired by the state to do mapping and projections of what would happen to the 1,100 miles of coast as sea level rise occurs. Every bay, every mouth of every river. And just recently, a business group in the San Francisco area have put on the ballot a measure to charge $12 per parcel to raise $500 million over 20 years to help restore marshland around San Francisco Bay to attempt to deal with the sea level rise that is going to impact all the way around San Francisco Bay. the theory is that by restoring one section of the bay, taking the concrete out and turning it back into its original natural state, that the surges of sea level rise will be able to be absorbed in that area. So when we hear things or see things in the news that the government in DC is ignoring, what's really happening in terms of climate change and sea level rise, steps are being taken. And part of what the plan is, circling back on trash, part of what the plan is that you can reduce the impact on the world from climate change if you can reduce, reuse, recycle. Those goals are now totally embedded in AB 32 and its follow-up legislation, Senate Bill 350. And that's how we'll see the policies that I believe all of us subscribe to in terms of trying to make how we live much more responsible in terms of waste reduction.